Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a major event that's made global headlines: an explosive attack that severed a key Russian supply route to Crimea. This event has huge implications for the war in Ukraine, for Russia's military logistics, and for the geopolitical situation in the region. It's not just another strike. It's a moment that could redefine how both sides wage this conflict going forward. The attack took place on the Kerch Bridge, also known as the Crimean Bridge, which connects mainland Russia to the occupied Crimean Peninsula. Early reports from Ukraine's security service claimed that this operation involved underwater explosives strategically placed on the bridge's support pillars. According to Ukrainian officials, around 100 kilograms of explosives were used in a carefully coordinated operation that took months to prepare. The bridge was temporarily closed as Russian authorities scrambled to assess the damage and restore traffic. This isn't the first time the bridge has been targeted. It was attacked twice before, once in October 2022 by a truck bomb, and again in July 2023 by maritime drones. Each time, it forced Russia to repair and reinforce the structure. But this most recent attack appears to have been far more sophisticated. The use of underwater explosives suggests Ukraine's growing expertise in maritime and special operations warfare. The bridge itself is far more than just a physical structure. It is a crucial supply route for Russia's military. It allows the transport of weapons, fuel, ammunition, and troops from Russia's mainland directly into Crimea and onward to the southern front lines of Ukraine. For Moscow, it's also a symbol, a political and emotional statement that Crimea is an inseparable part of Russia. Destroying or damaging it is, therefore, both a strategic and psychological blow. From Ukraine's perspective, this strike is not just about damaging infrastructure, but about sending a message. The head of Ukraine's security service called the bridge a legitimate target, emphasizing that Russia uses it as a logistical artery to supply its forces occupying Ukrainian land. Kyiv has repeatedly stated that Crimea remains part of Ukraine, and any infrastructure used by Russian troops is fair game. For Russia, however, the narrative is very different. Russian officials quickly downplayed the incident, claiming that the bridge was structurally sound and that traffic had resumed within hours. They avoided admitting any major damage, likely to prevent panic among civilians in Crimea and to maintain an image of control. At the same time, Russian military bloggers and unofficial channels discussed visible cracks and possible damage to the underwater pillars, suggesting that the impact may have been more serious than what Moscow admitted publicly. The strike's timing is significant. It came shortly after a series of Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian bomber bases deep within Russian territory, part of what Kyiv described as a coordinated campaign to weaken Russia's military infrastructure. These operations show that Ukraine is shifting toward deep strike tactics, hitting targets far behind the front lines to disrupt supply chains and destroy the enemy's sense of security. In practical terms, even temporary damage to the Kerch Bridge poses major logistical challenges for Russia. The bridge is a central hub for transporting heavy military equipment and fuel. If the route is compromised, supplies must be rerouted through alternative paths that are longer, riskier, and less efficient. That means slower resupply rates, reduced operational tempo, and potential shortages at the front. For Ukraine, disrupting these supply lines has always been a core part of its asymmetric warfare strategy. Since it cannot match Russia in sheer numbers or firepower, Ukraine focuses on undermining logistics, targeting command structures, and striking symbolic assets that weaken Russia's psychological resilience. The symbolic element of this attack cannot be overstated. The Kerch Bridge is a personal project for Vladimir Putin. He personally inaugurated it in 2018, driving the first truck across to mark what he called a historic reunification. Its destruction, or even partial damage, challenges the Kremlin's narrative of permanent control over Crimea. It reminds Russians that the war is not distant, that the territory they annexed and celebrated as theirs is still contested. For Ukrainians, this moment serves as a morale booster. It shows that even after years of war, Ukraine still possesses the skill, innovation, and determination to strike high-value targets. Domestically, it bolsters public confidence. Internationally, it strengthens Ukraine's argument for continued support and military aid from Western allies. It demonstrates that the weapons and intelligence they receive are being used effectively. On the Russian side, the psychological effects are complex. Civilians in Crimea may feel more vulnerable, especially after multiple attacks on key infrastructure. Russian social media reactions revealed anxiety about travel and the stability of supply chains. The Kremlin, meanwhile, faces a delicate balancing act, admitting too much damage risks undermining public confidence, but denying it altogether invites ridicule and skepticism. Operationally, the Russian military now faces new challenges. Protecting the Kerch Bridge from future attacks will require additional troops, air defenses, underwater surveillance, and possibly minesweeping operations in the surrounding waters. These measures will cost time, manpower, and money, resources that could otherwise be used on the battlefield. Ukraine's strategy, therefore, is not just to destroy a bridge, but to force Russia into an expensive defensive posture. Even if Russia manages to repair the bridge quickly, the psychological wound lingers. The message from Ukraine is clear. There are no safe zones for the occupier. Every strategic asset, no matter how well defended, is within reach. This kind of psychological warfare plays a huge role in long conflicts, eroding the enemy's confidence and making their commanders more cautious. The broader geopolitical implications are also important. Every time Ukraine successfully hits a target like this, it changes the international conversation. It reminds Western countries that Ukraine is still capable of bold and effective operations, countering any argument that military aid is wasted. It also pressures Russia diplomatically, as allies and adversaries alike see that Moscow cannot fully secure the territory it claims. The legal debate over such attacks also continues. Under international law, Ukraine maintains that any infrastructure used for military purposes becomes a legitimate target, even if it also serves civilians. Russia, on the other hand, accuses Ukraine of terrorism and of attacking civilian infrastructure. This war of narratives plays out not just on the battlefield, but across international forums, media, and diplomacy. From a technical standpoint, this operation highlights Ukraine's growing sophistication in maritime warfare. The country has been developing and deploying sea drones, underwater mines, and remote-controlled explosive vessels to counter Russia's naval dominance in the Black Sea. By hitting the Kerch Bridge, Ukraine demonstrated that it can project power into Russian-controlled waters, an area Moscow once considered untouchable. Strategically, this may force Russia to rethink its entire Black Sea posture. Increased naval patrols, the installation of underwater sensors, and restricted maritime routes could follow. These actions will slow trade, disrupt logistics, and strain Russian naval operations. In a war of endurance, that kind of cumulative pressure matters. For the people of Crimea, the situation remains tense. Temporary disruptions to the bridge mean interruptions in the flow of food, fuel, and civilian goods. Prices can rise, shortages may occur, and a sense of uncertainty spreads. For Ukraine, this could help weaken the civilian support base under Russian control, though Kyiv must balance this with the need to avoid humanitarian suffering that might alienate potential supporters in the region. This attack also has long-term implications for Russian military planning. If the Kerch Bridge can be struck again, it may lose its value as a dependable supply route. Russia will be forced to rely more on maritime shipping across the Black Sea or overland routes through occupied parts of southern Ukraine, both of which are more exposed to Ukrainian strikes. That means more cost, more vulnerability, and slower operations. The incident also feeds into the global perception of how the war is evolving. It shows that Ukraine is adapting and innovating while Russia is increasingly reactive. For Western observers, it reinforces the idea that helping Ukraine is still strategically worthwhile. For Russia's allies, it serves as a warning that Moscow's grip over Crimea is not as secure as it once appeared. The psychological dimension extends to the Russian leadership. For Vladimir Putin, the Kerch Bridge was a symbol of strength and achievement, a monument to the annexation of Crimea. Its repeated attacks now represent symbolic humiliation. Even if the bridge still stands, the very fact that it can be struck undermines the Kremlin's narrative of control and inevitability. The attack also fits into Ukraine's larger military doctrine of deep strike disruption. Instead of focusing solely on front-line trench warfare, Ukraine is targeting the systems that keep the Russian military functioning: logistics, command, and morale. By doing so, Kyiv aims to wear down Russia's ability to sustain a long war. Looking ahead, Russia will likely retaliate. Historically, major Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure have been followed by waves of missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. Kyiv will have to prepare for that, reinforcing air defenses and ensuring civilian resilience. But each Ukrainian success also strengthens Western resolve, as it shows that Ukraine continues to resist effectively. Economically, the cost of repair and protection adds up. The Kerch Bridge, already repaired twice, now demands even more funds and materials. For Russia's war economy, that's another strain at a time when sanctions and war expenses are already mounting. The more resources Moscow diverts to defense and repair, the fewer it can spend on offense. Environmentally, underwater explosions pose potential risks to marine ecosystems in the Kerch Strait. Such concerns are secondary in wartime, but they can have long-lasting consequences for fisheries, coastal health, and maritime trade routes. This adds another layer of complexity to the ongoing regional crisis. In the broader scope of warfare, the Kerch Bridge attack is a textbook example of asymmetric strategy, using limited resources to cause disproportionate disruption. It's a reminder that modern conflicts are not won only by occupying territory, but by destabilizing the systems that sustain the enemy's control. Ukraine's ability to strike a massive structure like the bridge using unconventional means speaks volumes about its adaptability and intelligence capabilities. For ordinary Ukrainians, the news of the successful strike is seen as a moment of hope and pride. It shows that even after years of hardship, the country can still deliver powerful blows to a much larger adversary. For Russians, it serves as a stark reminder that the war is far from over and that the sense of safety inside occupied territories is illusory. If we take a step back, what we see is a conflict that's increasingly defined by infrastructure warfare. Power plants, bridges, supply depots, and communication hubs are all targets now. The battlefield has expanded beyond the trenches to the entire logistical network that sustains the war. The Kerch Bridge is just the most visible symbol of that shift. Ultimately, this attack represents both a tactical and psychological victory for Ukraine. Whether or not the bridge is fully destroyed matters less than the message it sends. It demonstrates that Russia's war machine is not invincible, and that its most cherished symbols are vulnerable. For Russia, the road ahead is one of difficult choices. Invest even more heavily in defending Crimea and its supply lines, or risk losing them piece by piece to continued Ukrainian pressure. Either way, the cost of holding Crimea is rising with each new strike. For Ukraine, the operation highlights what can be achieved through intelligence, patience, and strategic planning. It reinforces the belief that the fight for Crimea is not just symbolic but achievable, that the occupiers' infrastructure can be dismantled step by step. As the war continues, such operations are likely to become more frequent and more complex. Each side learns and adapts, but Ukraine's ability to keep surprising its opponent remains one of its greatest strengths. The attack on the Kerch Bridge is a reminder that even after years of brutal conflict, creativity and resolve still matter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates. Stay safe, stay informed, and see you in the next one.